And we're live.
Good afternoon, good evening, good wherever the heck in the world you are. It's the one, the only V, the Gorilla Economist coming to you live with my main man, CJ, who is flying around in the airways in the background because he is back from doing the things that he needed to do. And we have none other. It's that time of the month, and we have none other than Charles Hugh Smith of Two Minds Blog. And what I honestly, in all fairness, in all humility, I would actually say that Charles is one of the most brightest, clearest thinking minds out there right now. So without further ado, Charles, what's up, buddy? How are you?
Hey, thank you so much. And I try to be clear, but then there's all those incoherent things I'm constantly writing and saying. So, talking all these crazy ideas about how cryptocurrencies are going to save the world and stuff. So hey, I'm very anxious to get your views on all the action in the last month in the crypto space. I mean, we've seen like crash, like basically lose two-thirds of its value from the top, but it bounced big today, and all this worry about Bitcoin splitting and the hard fork and all that stuff. What do you guys make of that?
I think it's excellent. I think it's great news, man. I think here's the deal. I truly feel that all this news that is coming out about SegWit, segregated witness, and all these other things that are coming up, and these crypto beatdowns has exactly to do with that very thing that I'm talking about in terms of, um, you know, everybody's dumping their currencies, their cryptos right now because they want to make money. They want to get ready because they want the price to be suppressed. I was talking to an individual earlier today, and he said it best. They want the prices to be suppressed so that all of a sudden, when SegWit is launched, it's going to be off to the races, man. It's going to be a major game changer. That's why the prices are being suppressed because they want to buy this stuff up on the cheap. So they're getting ready for SegWit. They're getting ready for so many other things that are happening as well, which is really going to change the game.
Right. That sounds right to me because I'm not technically adept enough to follow all the arguments about There's a couple of variations on SegWit and the technical side of it, but clearly the miners of Bitcoin have they have common cause in the sense that nobody wants a hard fork, and so I'm hoping that that sort of incentive will help resolve which version of SegWit gets picked by the majority of miners.
Yeah,
So
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
but larger view, and I know you guys talk about this a lot with other guests, but larger view is, where is all this funny money that the central banks have created? Roughly $14 trillion or something like that, and not to mention all the other trillions in private debt that's been created. Where's all this funny money going to go when the wheels fall off, the euro and all the fiat currencies, or just there's a whiff of fear in the air. And so where's all this money going to go? I mean, it's already gone into London flats. It's already gone into Australian condos. I mean, it's already gone into stocks. It's already gone into bonds. I mean, if any of those markets start weakening, where's all these trillions of bucks going to go and for safety? And of course, a lot of people feel gold and silver, and there certainly will be some interest in those as long-term historical stores of value. But even if 1% of that vast flood of phony money filters into the cryptocurrencies, I mean, talk about a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely correct, man. Absolutely correct. And the thing is also that you got to realize, um, the shenanigans that also occurs with all the changes that are happening with cryptos, and a lot of these people are saying, "Hey, what's going to happen? We have all these balance sheets. It's got to dump. Yeah, you know what? It's got to go somewhere." And I think, you know, we have to do is look across the ocean and see the change that countries like Japan has been doing. Like their central bank, what have they been doing? Well, they've been buying equities. They've been buying equities, and I think that's where these central banks are headed. They're going to have to buy equities. They're going to have to buy cryptos. They're going to be buying gold, silver, and what you wrote about months and months ago, I think is going to come true, Charles. I think we're moving into a phase right now where it's going to be the march of the march of the equities market, the march of cryptocurrencies on the way up, the march of precious metals, all marching together on an upward trajectory. I think that's exactly where we're headed.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, let's talk about how we got here to where there's trillions of what we have to call like fake wealth um, in these bubbles. You know, these asset bubbles. How did we get to this point? And so I just want to go back over the last 30 years of history, and it includes both Democratic and Republican administrations. So it's not a political thing. We're talking here about the entire financial system and political system, the status quo, right? Both parties have supported the same stuff, right?
Right.
So, but it's interesting to go back and go, how, you know, if somebody asks us, well, why do you guys think the things are fragile and these bubbles are about ready to burst, right? Or there'll be one more last gasp of like the final run up. And the answer goes back to the 1980s, you know, when the federal and other authorities loosened the bank regulations regarding leverage. You know, in the good old days, banks would leverage maybe 10 to 1. In other words, they got $1 of a deposit, they'd issue $9 in a mortgage or other, you know, loan. Well, then that changed, and then the bank leverage went up to 26 to 1. So if the bank lost like 4% of its loan book in value, well, it was insolvent. You know, I mean, in other words, so this was a systemic change that really increased the vulnerability and fragility of the system. But that was just step one. Then step two, under President Clinton, they got rid of Glass-Steagall, which was the division between investment and commercial banking, right? So then everybody could start playing funny money games. Then they loosened all the lending standards so that you know, we got liar loans, and apparently that
Those are
hasn't
the
gone
best.
away.
Didn't you
Yeah.
love those liar loans? They were incredible. You know.
Hey, just you make 200 grand a year, right? Just write it down. It's fact.
That's it. That's it. You know, just write it down. Do you know how to fog a mirror? Well, then
Well,
you two can get a loan.
isn't that what's bled into the and auto market? I mean,
Yes,
isn't
it
that
is.
what we're reading?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what we're reading in the auto industry. That's why it's gotten so bad, Charles, that they are willing to do, for the first time ever, loans for people that are they're giving them low credit, no credit discount loans. If you got bad credit, they'll give you an additional $1,500 off. I mean, it's beautiful. Oh
Yeah,
man,
it's incredible. Then the fourth step was too big to fail.
yeah,
After they'd loosened all this thing, like this whole process of financialization, which bulked up the banks, made the banks much more vulnerable to any decline, and created this vast increase in debt and leverage. Well, then the banking sector was too big a part of the economy and too big of a source of all that funny money that was supporting the economy. So we had to bail them out, right? And then
right.
the fifth thing was, even that wasn't enough. Then they had to do quantitative easing, you know, which is like buying all the assets you're talking about. They started with buying treasuries and stuff, and then they've expanded from that. Each one of these steps is huge, you know, and each one, no one could have anticipated it in the previous decade. You know, in other words, nobody in 1960 would have thought that the federal government would allow banks to ramp up their leverage to these insane levels of 25, 30 to 1. Nobody thought Glass-Steagall would be destroyed. Nobody thought that they would loosen lending standards so that, you know, as you say, anybody that can fog a mirror gets a mortgage. Nobody thought that we would bail out these banks because, oh, now they're too big to fail. And nobody thought that the Federal Reserve would create $4 trillion out of thin air and buy bonds with it. And yet each one of these things is necessary now because the system is increasingly fragile. And so they have to go to further and further extremes to keep the whole thing from imploding.
Yeah, yeah, exactly correct, man. Exactly correct.
And so that's why when you talk about Japan being in the lead, that's it. They started their whole crazy policy extreme thing 25 years ago. So now what they own roughly what half or is it two-thirds of all the
64%
poof,
of all the equity markets in the Tokyo Stock Exchange is held by the Bank of Japan.
that's nuts.
Oh, you gotta love it. You gotta love it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You got to love it. And so this whole system is unsustainable, right? Because you're basically borrowing from the future, and at some point the future arrives, and there's nobody left
Right.
who qualifies for a legitimate loan or wants to borrow more money, right? Like people are prudent; they don't want money, even if it's 0%. You know, like your Ford or GMC truck, hey, 0% financing for 6 years. Yeah, well, what if you decide you don't want that debt, even if it's supposedly free?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
no one can force that private lending. So the wheels are going to fall off, and they've ramped up the policies supporting these asset bubbles to the point where there's no more ammo left, right? I mean, what other extreme can you have? And like you said, well, you can buy the equity markets, you can nationalize the pension funds and take all those and put them on the taxpayer, but the taxpayer can't pay any more tax because then there's no money left to consume anything, and so the economy craters that way. So there's really no easy answer. Raising taxes is not a solution, although many people seem to think it is.
Exactly correct, man. I think a lot of foolish people think raising taxes are the way to go, and it is not the way to go. It's a very precarious situation that we see ourselves in, Charles. It really is precarious. Look, there's an interesting video that I was watching on YouTube, and it was from RT, and they were interviewing an author by the name of Lin Lindh. Lin and Din Din is his name. Lin Din. He wrote a book called Postcards from Post America, and basically what he's detailing is right now we are the poorest industrialized nation in the world, and he was saying some very uncomfortable truths, and those uncomfortable truths are that we're broke. We are totally broke, and the fact remains that you look at over 50% of our population, they just cannot function. They can't function at all.
Yeah, frightening. Um, yeah, and when I write about degrowth, which is the idea that we need to change our system so that we can actually use less of everything and still have a good life if our
Right.
income is declining. And so some readers told me, hey, we're already in that degrowth because they're talking about the empty malls, they're talking about the systemic chronic unemployment in many parts of the U.S. and the lack of opportunity. And so what I think Lynn Din's commentary kind of highlights the fact that financialization was supposed to save us, right? In other words, we're going to create more debt, more leverage, play more games with invented money, and that's going to make our economy strong. And what it's actually done is it's really weakened the real economy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so all the money that's created by these financialization policies has flowed to the upper like 1/5 or of 1%, right? I mean that those statistically, that very top thin layer, not even the top 1%, but the top 0.2%, their wealth's increased by like 384% or something over like the last 12 years, and then the bottom 95%, it's like it's either gone nowhere or maybe it's actually declined depending on how you measure inflation. So it's created this huge wealth and income inequality that's then disrupting the society, right?
Mhm.
It's not just an economic question anymore.
No, it really is. I mean, what is all this money printing? What does it do? Capital destruction, capital malformation, distorted asset prices, and these are the things that we're witnessing today. It's terrible. It's terrible. These guys have come up with some very creative ways of doing all this stuff, man, and it's nothing but serious damage. You know?
Yeah. It's I don't know where you fall on this question, but and I'm kind of an agnostic. A lot of people feel that the powers that be, it's all part of this grand plan. Like the globalization, one world, one currency, and so all these crises and all the wealth inequality and everything, it's all part of some grand plan that they're going to even take more of the money and power at some point. And then I'm more of the mind that that may be the case, but I'm more of the mind that it's all just ad hoc. It,
It
it, it
is.
feels it feels more like people doing what's politically expedient,
Right.
not like a grand plan.
Right. And then and then when we prove that it's not some mathematically precise everything, meticulously measured to their outcome, and there's incredible evidence of that it's not, that these guys are actually in most cases flying by the seat of their pants, making a ton of mistakes along the way, stupid mistakes that have all backfired on them. And yet the naysayers will say, well, that's all part of the plan, because you're not looking at the other end of it, because that's exactly what they planned. That's exactly what they wanted. So let me get this straight. They spent you know decades upon decades developing this thing called a New World Order, and the only thing that they can that they have to show for right now is a blowback of nationalism. So they spent all this time with this vaunted New World Order, and now nationalism comes along. But they're for the New World Order, but they're also for nationalism because that was all part of their plan. If this is the case, the New World Order is the most schizophrenic New World Order the world has ever seen. And if they're schizophrenic, Charles, then we have nothing to worry about. Okay, we really don't.
Yeah, exactly. And you can also take the claim, well, they're gonna aggregate even more wealth and power. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. The top 1% already owns 2/3 of all the wealth. They control 100% of the political power. How much more can they take without triggering
Exactly.
a revolution? Like you said, you get blowback at some point. You can starve people and tell them, let them eat cake. And then your head gets in a guillotine, a few weeks later.
Exactly, exactly. And that's the lesson of history that nobody wants to talk about, man. That's the lesson of history that people tend to forget about. And people don't realize, man. They simply do not realize this, the situation at large. They really don't.
Yeah. Well, you pinged me before we started recording that you were interested in the topic of I wrote about, like, our political parties are obsolete, and that's
Yes.
that's something that seems dead obvious to many of us, but is not in the mainstream. So, what's your view on that?
Yeah, they are obsolete. I think political parties are obsolete. I think banks are obsolete. I think these guys are, they are really in a heap of trouble, and they simply do not know what to do, Charles. They're totally obsolete. I mean, they're they're banking masters. I mean, look how terrified they are. Look how terrified they are about cryptocurrencies. Look how terrified they are about all that's happening in the world. They're losing power. Everything's going decentralized. In a decentralized world, where does centralized government fit in? Right?
Right, right, and centralized money.
Yeah.
Yeah, because one of the things I don't claim to even fully understand, but one thing I notice about the cryptocurrencies that makes them so much different than the fiat currencies, centralized banks issue, they don't they're not borrowed into existence. They don't accrue interest. And that's what's really wrong with the centralized money we have now is it's been borrowed into existence. So somebody
Yeah.
owes interest on it, and the interest piles up. And if there's any lesson from Japan, it's, oh well, their interest rates are absurd. You get a tenth of 1% for buying a Bank of Japan bond, right?
Right.
Or a government bond. And yet they've piled up so much debt that even at this ridiculously near zero interest rate, like the largest single item in the government of Japan's budget is interest.
Yeah.
So even at a tenth of 1%, eventually it eats you alive. And so that's the thing that I think is really powerful about cryptocurrencies. Not, of course, Bitcoin has an upper limit, right? And so 21 million, that's all it can ever have. But even a crypto that doesn't have a limit, if it has demurrage, like some way that the money supply can be limited, kind of like airline miles go away if you don't use them. There's various mechanisms that could work in a cryptocurrency that doesn't have an upper limit. But the whole point here is nobody's paying interest on that money.
Right.
And that's huge, because that's really what causes the real economy to eat itself. You know, the
Yeah.
snake eats its own tail. When most of us are paying most of our income, or the national income goes to paying interest, then you've got no money left to do anything else, like invest in the future. And that's where we're at now.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And when you look at the fact that, you know, I was just reading a great article, and I was actually having a talk with a colleague of mine. What ICOs are doing and what cryptos are doing is the equivalent of what was done in the United States history prior to the establishment of a central bank, where private institutions owned by private individuals of means were able to issue their own certificates of deposit based upon whatever the person was depositing in their specific depository, and that certificate of deposit was used as a specie in order for the transaction of goods and services. That's exactly what cryptocurrency is doing. So the central banks are absolutely terrified. They're terrified. They don't know what to do.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating you bring that up, because, and I don't claim any deep, scholarly knowledge of the early 1800s, which is the period you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about, which is, but I do know that Hamilton and his crowd, the central bankers, that he felt that was the way to grow an empire, and in a way he was correct, right? If
Right.
empire is your goal, then by all means get a central bank. But there was a lot of pushback to Hamilton from regional players and decentralized, the state economies, where they saw this ability to create private money that you're basically describing. That's what created the opportunity for entrepreneurism, because if all the money's sitting in one central location, well, then only the rich and powerful have access to it.
Correct.
Yeah, and
Correct.
everybody else is out. So you have an entrepreneurial idea, well, guess what? You've got no credit. And so creating credit is what created the boom of the 1830s, And of
Mm-hmm.
course, that's the thing we have to point out here is there's a lot of crash and burn in a free-for-all kind of economy like that. Just like the ICO world, there's crash and burn. 7 million bucks stolen out of some ICO, and some ICOs will crash and burn. And this is all this is what we call, real life. This is the way the ecosystem of nature works. A lot of stuff crashes and burns. Species die out. Not every experiment works, and that's the price you pay for vitality.
Yeah. Exactly correct, Charles. Exactly correct. Um, one of the questions that a lot of people have is, again, all the things that are happening with cryptos, all the things that are happening with SegWit, with Bitcoin. Uh, what is useful, what is not useful, and some people get really weary. They get very scared, almost very nervous about, oh, what do I invest in? What do I get? What do I do? Folks, that's part of the excitement. The fact that we're having debates about, is SegWit good? Is it not good? The fact that we're having debates about which form of Bitcoin will be the best, which way should the blockchain should be split. These are great conversations because it's happening in the public space, not behind closed doors on an island with a bunch of banksters. So
Yeah.
that's a great thing to have, and I love the discourse, and I think that's what people need to be celebrating more than anything else, is the fact that cryptocurrencies are bringing together the power of the individuals and the power of people. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right in that. And the debate over whether a currency is fully decentralized or not, that's a great argument to have, because the only way that you're ever going to get transparency is if people are arguing in the open. you
Yeah.
know, and people are voting, and the miners get to vote, and in one way, and the users of the currency get to vote, and you know, it looks like a mess, right? It's like a chaotic mess, but that's actually that's the healthiest ecosystem possible.
Yeah, it absolutely is, man. It absolutely is. And it
Yeah,
is the most healthiest ecosystem possible. You want that debate. You want people questioning things. At least, at least that discourse is in the public domain. That's the most important
yes,
thing. That discourse is with us. It's not with some bureaucrats. It's not with some central banker. It's not with anybody else but us. And we can't ask for a better situation or a better deal than that, Charles.
that's right. That's right. And it's in the public domain, and it's in the public interest. And you know, I saw an interesting chart. Speaking of cryptocurrencies and this sort of transparent debate about the development and growth, I saw an interesting chart about the adoption rate of technology. And you know, like say it started with like the landline telephone, right? And it took about 30 or 40 years for the majority of the population to have access to a phone or get a phone line, right? And then it was like radio and all the different technologies. And as we moved into the digital age, right, when analog electronics went to, you know, microelectronics, then it started speeding up, right? And so then, and now we're at the point where, you know, Facebook is like a fantasy in some college kid's mind, and then like a few years later, it's like a dominant industry, you know. And so and so we're the cryptocurrencies are in that really fast adoption stage, and
Yeah,
it's
it is.
almost like they're growing and developing faster than any institution can keep track of them. And that's why
Correct.
technology is disruptive, right? Is that politics likes to think about things for a few decades, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, like the Germans introduced social welfare in 1890, and then it took like 40 years for the US, and then it took a Great Depression and everything else. But it took decades for people to kind of like ponder some notion and then finally decide to enact it. And then it doesn't change for another 40 years or 80 years. You know, it becomes ossified and a failure, and nobody can dare touch it. And so but technology doesn't have those kinds of limitations that institutions have. And so that's the other beauty of the cryptocurrency space.
Yes, it
Like you
is.
said, it's gonna decentralize things, whether the institutions like it or not, and whether they catch up or not. It's out of their hands already.
Oh, absolutely correct, man. It's a genie who's, you know, it's out of the bottle, and no matter what they do, they just simply cannot put it back in the bottle. It's too late. And whether they like it,
Yeah.
everything's getting disrupted. Like I tell a lot of young people, right? These are young people that are, getting out of college, going into college, whatever, right? You are competing in a global economy. You are, for the first time in human history, competing not only in a global economy but in an economy that is so cutthroat, where what is here today as a quote unquote industry cannot be there tomorrow because technology is moving at such a rapid clip. We're seeing the eradication of industries and or the robotification and automation of certain industries. Everything's getting disrupted. So either you're going to be part of innovative technologies and innovative new ways of doing things. In other words, you're going to be the dissenting disruptor, or you're going to be the disrupted. That's the ultimate choice you have.
Yeah, right. And seeking safety within institutions, it still looks like safe to a lot of millennials. Like, well, I'll just get a government job, or I'll enter academia, or I'll enter healthcare, and that'll be like a guaranteed job. And what you're saying, which I totally agree with, is there's nothing guaranteed.
Nothing.
The more ossified an industry is, the more vulnerable it is to massive disruption, right? Because it's just like all low hanging fruit, and healthcare and education are definitely low hanging fruit.
Yep.
They're so corrupt, so inefficient, so ineffective, so costly. It's like they're just really ripe for someone to come in and totally disrupt them by cutting, doing a better service for like half or a third of the existing cost.
Exactly.
So yeah, if you're not part of the disrupting force, you're going to be the the disrupted.
Can you imagine 50 years you and I having a conversation talking about government's going to be disrupted and obsolete? I mean, think about how foregone that conclusion is, right? Think about it.
Yeah.
Just 10, 15 years ago, okay, this is unfathomable. 10, 15 years ago, anybody in the alt media blogosphere was talking about, oh, it's the New World Order. They're coming to screw us all over, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, it's all hopeless. You just get over it, It's just, and now you look at it, it's a different ball game. I mean, Zbigniew Brzezinski's dead, thank God. And the last thing that Ziggy has said, Charles, was the grand chessboard. It is a failure. That's the last thing old Ziggy has said before he keeled over and croaked. He had the blessing to see his grand chessboard come to nothing, which is great. Which is
Right.
wonderful because that was to me cosmic justice.
Right, and speaking of the chessboard, the whole idea there is there's these centralized powers, and there's little cliques of mostly men, but a few women in these little rooms, like you said, and they're going to sort it all out, and they'll come out and sort of like Latter-day Moses announce their decisions about how things are going to be. Right,
Mhm.
that's the whole eurozone. A handful of powers that be in Brussels come out and announce, oh, we've just, these are 1,200 new rules you all have to follow,
Yeah, yeah,
And so that's the model of the great chessboard, is a bunch of, whether the powers that be are a little tiny circle of guys in Tehran, and then another little group of guys in Saudi Arabia, and another little group of guys in the EU, and another little group of guys in the Pentagon. I mean, it's like, yeah, that world is dead. Although those people are the last who will come to accept the fact that their power is waning, and it's to the benefit of all humanity that it's waning.
yeah. Exactly correct. Exactly
Um,
correct.
yeah, and I've been thinking about this fragmentation we're talking about, because that's really what decentralization is that the centralized model no longer works. Relying on the federal government to fix your local economy, that's a good way to start an opioid epidemic, right? Because that's what the federal government will pay you to do, is become addicted to opioids. There's lots of money for
Yeah.
that. No
Right.
problem. And so, but to actually improve your community, well, we don't have any money for that.
Who wants to
So
do that?
so you're going to have to solve our problems decentralized, and that's the whole idea behind cryptocurrencies and the blockchain. And so this is actually the model that what happened after the Western Roman Empire broke up, right? I mean, that things fragmented, and that's what became so-called feudalism, as people realized that empires weren't solving their local problems anymore, and so they had to start solving them themselves. And so that fragmentation, we look at it from the point of view of empire, and we go, oh, that was a horrible dark ages and all that kind of stuff. And now people are rethinking that and going, well, actually, this worked. This was a
Yeah.
solution, And so
Right.
whatever solves real problems gets adopted. And my favorite example, or one of my favorite examples, is, eyeglasses came out of Venice, in Italy, around,
Sure.
I think it was discovered around the 1300s, mid 1300s, but there were already many people, craftspeople, making lenses and stuff by the early 1400s. And within a few years, they showed up in the imperial palace in Beijing, in China, right? Because they
Mhm.
solved a huge problem. Like, you couldn't read, you were old, and your eyesight was shot. Well, this solved the problem. It was quickly adopted around the world, and really fast, And so
Yeah.
that's where, if you see blockchain technologies as being solutions, then you're not surprised at the fast adoption rate, because if it solves real problems, it gets adopted really fast. If it doesn't solve problems, then it becomes an academic thing where people write papers about it for 20 years.
Exactly right. Exactly correct. No, you're right, Charles. This is the. I've never seen the speed at which all these solutions are taking place. it's absolutely rampant. It's absolutely mind blowing. All these things that are happening, and I look at certain governments that get it and they're moving with it, and then you see other governments like ours where you have a bunch of brain dead senators who are out there saying we're going to go ahead and fine and tax the issuer of Bitcoin. And I start laughing because there's no. I mean, they were putting that verbiage together as if it was a central bank, you know, the issuer
Yeah.
of Bitcoin. Well, there is no issuer of Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. They can't grasp it, I don't think. That
No, they
there's got to
still
be
don't
some
have it.
guy somewhere. Go find this guy Satoshi and nail him.
Nail him. You got to go find him. He's probably like that guy Ulrich from the New Silk Road. It's probably him. He's probably one. He's somehow doing it from behind bars. That's who it is. I mean, when you look at it this way, Charles, I mean, you know, you had a Florida Supreme Court judge, who recently ruled that Bitcoin is not money, it's just like poker chips. And I'm like, that's wonderful. That's great. I want more poker chips. I want more of this stuff to happen.
Right, right. And well, have other people shared this concern with you that the super wealthy, the fat cats that have access to all this, credit money, that they're going to just try to buy up all the cryptos and there won't be any left for the rest of us? I mean, I
Oh
think
yeah.
that's
Oh yeah. That's what's going to happen. They're going to buy up all the cryptos and going to be nothing left.
and that's where that's one possibility in my mind. When people say you guys are nuts who say Bitcoin could go to $100,000, and I'm thinking, well, that may be the plan. And if you have enough funny money, then why not just start acquiring all the Bitcoin so there's none left? That
Hmm.
the pool of available Bitcoin becomes so small that the price uh, goes parabolic, right? And
Right.
that would well, if you were had $10 billion, isn't that what you'd want to see happen once you build your nest egg of Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Sure. So I think the future is that's why I'm kind of a little wary of counting on Bitcoin unless you already have your stash or you're building it
Mhm.
now, because I'm afraid it's going to be unaffordable going forward for the average person.
Exactly. And then there's still more and more opportunities in the sense that you have more cryptos that are coming out and more cryptos that are solutions based, that are
Yeah.
springing forth. And I think it's a good thing, man. I think it's a really good thing.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, because if there's no crypto left of a particular variety, well, then we now have the means to go ahead and issue our own within a specific trading circle of goods and services and people creating real stuff. And if so, that's, I think, the ultimate future is a variety of cryptocurrencies that arise to serve like local decentralized businesses that then have access to the global marketplace.
Yeah.
And then if I can trade, if there's 50 cryptos out there, I mean, there's already hundreds, right? But if it shouldn't be that difficult, if we anticipate this, of you're buying and trading and selling your stuff in a variety of cryptocurrencies, and then you can switch them into whatever else you want, what other crypto you want, or a fiat or whatever. And
Yeah.
so once that becomes transparent, then the whole issue of which currency is going to be the best, and all this kind of you know stupid, needless debate over Ethereum and Bitcoin and Monero. And hey, it's like there doesn't have to be one top dog cryptos. All these cryptos serve different markets and needs, and so the more the merrier.
Right. Right. I agree with you wholeheartedly, man. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Charles, I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of things are happening in the Middle East, man. What's your take on the shenanigans over there?
Well, it's very interesting. And if can I ask you to indulge in some geopolitical
Yeah, sure.
history? Is that I've been reading a lot of histories over the last couple years about the empires from the Bronze Age, which was before the Greeks and Romans, And then through the Roman era and the Byzantine era up to around 1400. And it's interesting that the Persian Empire, which we now call Iran, they've been around for like 2,000 years, right? And they
Yeah.
were always a counterbalance to anybody trying to control the whole Mid East. And this was true of the Roman Empire and the Persians. It was true of the Arabs in like 700 AD. That so in a way, things never change. In other words, we have an Arab nexus that you can identify it as Qatar or Saudi Arabia, or a variety of sources of Arab political power and economic power. And then you've got the Persian sort of center of power, which is now Iran. And then you've got the European powers, however you want to describe them. And then you've got Russia, which was always a player, but from around the 1200s on. And so in a way, it's like, it is, not to use Ziggy's thing of the chessboard, but there's a lot of powers that want to influence sources of trade, sources of wealth, and political power. And so in a way, we're just jockeying with this, the same players, only the US is now a new player, relatively new. But if you go back, you go, well, the Eastern European nations are, they have a different perspective, Ukraine up to Poland, and then Russia's got its own perspective. And then there's China, right, which with the Silk Road is really trying to bypass the, in my view, they're trying to get around the dominance of maritime powers. In other words, when China's Silk Road was the trading route in like 1200, right? And further back, because it was the only way to get stuff from the Roman Empire to China through Afghanistan, and pick up trade with India, and it served everybody. But it was a land route, obviously, right? And it was really arduous. I mean, you're going through like 2,000 kilometers of desert. I mean, hello, not that easy, not that fun. Takes months. And so when the Europeans developed the trading ships that could go, bypass the land routes, it was much cheaper to ship by water. And so the Chinese are trying to bypass the fact that they're not really a maritime power. I mean, there's a lot of trade with China that's maritime, but they're trying to kind of up the ante on and restore a land route. And if it's cheaper than container shipping, then they've got a winner. If it's a lot more expensive than container shipping, they got a boondoggle. That's my view.
Yeah.
So yeah, Syria. And so I guess to summarize, my point would be, Syria is now like it was literally 2,000 years ago. I mean, the Roman legions were fighting in Syria to capture that control of that area from the Persian Empire and from other empires which have since faded into the dust of history. And so it's like, oh, here we go again, and so we're jockeying over this thing. And why are we jockeying over Syria? Well, it's central to pipelines running out of the Gulf, for one thing, right? I mean, what do you see going on there in terms of the drivers of all this conflict?
Yeah, I mean, it is pipeline. It's the survival of the petrodollar. All these things are what's being played out in Syria, man. And I think what's happening over there is we're seeing the culmination of the dying petrodollar. We're seeing the destruction, the soon to be dismantling of the dollar. I mean, people are sick of it. People are really sick of the United States. They're sick of the whole petrodollar scheme. They're sick of, this whole entire maritime superpower that has really been very abusive. It was a very abusive superpower, and a power that has not taken its responsibilities on the world stage very seriously at all. And that's the problem here, Charles. That is the problem. So I think, the whole entire thing of what's happening with Syria, with Iraq, with the entire Middle East, is it's all being reordered. And the Western powers that be, they don't call those shots anymore. We're seeing that a lot of them do not call the shots anymore when it comes to what's going on over there. And I think we're seeing China and Russia stepping up and even Iran stepping up as a stabilizing force.
Right, right. I think there's a lot of promise in Iran, and it's been demonized by the the U.S. political establishment for so many decades. It's like Americans can't possibly. I mean, it's really hard to cut through all that and say, well, maybe Iran has a positive role in the world. I mean, heck, that's like
Oh yeah.
you don't read that. But tell us a little more. I mean, maybe all your listeners are totally hip to the petrodollar, but I'd like you to fill in a little bit about what that actually means, because we see it
Sure.
as a word, but yeah, tell us a little more about what that means.
When most people hear the word petrodollar, they just simply hear that oil backed. That the oil is backed by the dollar, and oil's priced in dollars, and this, that, and the other. And when I hear the word petrodollar, I hear this that the entire petrodollar system is linchpinned on the fact that it is protected by the full faith and might, not of the United States dollar, but of the United States Navy. That's who ensures that the passage of petroleum, from the Middle East, continues unabated, without any threats from pirates, without any threats from, any sort of, uh, danger, or any sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Any sort of tension. Because let's be honest here, oil is a very speculative market. So the slightest tension will upset oil prices, and that's something that nobody could really afford to do. So the United States military ensures that this petrodollar system continues to flourish, and that's basically why we're there. That's why we're always fighting wars of empire. How can we not fight wars of empire when you have a world reserve currency? Empire and world reserve currency goes hand in hand. I mean, just look at the Brits, you know.
Right.
But these are all things that are
Yeah.
changing, Charles.
Right. Right. And I think when I hear petrodollar, I think of that capital flow, whereby all the money goes to the oil producing nations in dollars, and they have to recycle those dollars. And guess what? They buy a lot of treasury bonds, right? So all that flow of dollars ends up supporting the capital allocation in the U.S., right? That's the petrodollar system, is that the money flows back to the U.S.,
Yeah,
all the money that
yeah,
was paid. And that's a very good point about that the whole thing is now in question. And I just want to make a point about empire. If you go back to whatever empire you choose, there was always spheres of influence, right? Like an empire has its sort of allies or areas that are beholden to it, but not actually ruled by it. And the key seems to be for stability is it has to work for everybody. In other words, if the
yeah,
empire demands a tax, so to speak, right? And it's not too unbearable, well, then it's just cheaper and easier for everybody to go ahead and pay the empire. The empire's happy, everybody's. Then you move on. You have your own life. But if the empire starts demanding so much that it doesn't work for you, well, then you have to rebel. And so that's kind of what you're describing in a sort of general dynamic, I think. If it doesn't work for you anymore, then you've got to try to throw those shackles off.
yeah. I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. And we're moving into a world again that is not relegated by the systems that have been around for the last several hundred years, last several centuries to be exact. And in a decentralized world, in a multipolar world that we're moving into, you know, um, you have to come out with mutually beneficial agreements because let's be honest, technology has changed everything. Technology has ensured that not one person or not one group holds that trump card anymore,
Yes,
and that's the difference,
that's right.
man. Yeah, it's a
That's
different
the
game.
difference.
Yep.
Right. And one last little quick thought I wanted to throw in here. I know we're running out of time. Is the blockchain technology is going to influence fields that we in ways that we haven't discerned yet. And just one example that I've just learned about a little bit is journalism. Here we hear about fake news and real news and mainstream news, and it's like it's hard to sort out, right? But the
Right.
blockchain could actually be used to verify journalism, because it's a decentralized verification system. And so instead of wondering whether the CNN headline is fake news, I mean, we can assume it is now, right? I mean, that's almost dead certain. But I'm just saying, in general, even journalism could be revolutionized by blockchain technology.
Correct.
That's an incredible thought. So it's another system, like you mentioned. All the systems are being dismantled, including centralized journalism, where we're told, "Oh no, this is the truth."
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Orwellian thing. This is the truth, and everything else is fake news,
Right.
and you can't question it.
Right.
And the blockchain allows us. Well, actually, we can verify what was actually happening, say in Syria, through the blockchain in a way that can't be dismantled by the centralized journalism we have now. So interesting stuff.
I agree wholeheartedly, man. I hear you. Charles, we're just about at the end of the program. Why don't you plug your site, how people could follow you, your social media?
Okay, visit me at of2minds.com. And if you burrow into my page about my book, A Radically Beneficial World, you can find my boring essay on cryptocurrencies that, if you're having trouble going to sleep, check it out. You'll probably be asleep within 30 seconds. But take a look at everything else I've written, and I appreciate the visit.
Absolutely. With that being said, folks, thank you all for listening in. Once again, it is Charles Hugh Smith of Two Minds Blog. Please tune in and listen to what Charles has to say. Very, very important. With that being said, guys, thank you all for listening in again. CJ, take it away.